lifted the mop slightly. "Good morning, sir." Harrington's jaw tightened. "Why are you up here?" "I'm assigned to clean this floor today," Elias said calmly. "Facilities approved it." Harrington laughed, not amused, not friendly. "I don't remember approving anything." A few assistants nearby pretended not to listen. "You people don't belong up here during business hours," Harrington continued. "It's distracting." Elias met his eyes. "I'll finish quickly." That calmness, that lack of fear. Harrington hated it. "No," Harrington said coldly. "You're done." Harrington turned to his assistant. "Call HR." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, there's no." "Now." HR arrived flustered, tablet in hand. Harrington didn't lower his voice. "I want him terminated. Immediately." The HR manager glanced at Elias. "Sir, has he violated a policy?" Harrington stepped closer to Elias, towering over him. "He violated my patience." Elias spoke softly. "Is there a complaint against me?" Harrington smirked. "There doesn't need to be." Security was called. As Elias was escorted away, the entire floor watched. Some felt uncomfortable. Some felt sorry. None intervened. Just before entering the elevator, Elias turned back. Their eyes met. Elias smiled. And Richard Harrington felt something strange. A flicker of doubt. Then the doors closed. At 8:57 a.m., Harrington poured himself an espresso. 10 minutes after firing the janitor, his phone rang. "Richard," the CFO said urgently, "we have an issue." Harrington sighed. "Handle it." "Our offshore liquidity account has been frozen." Silence. "What?" Harrington asked. Before the CFO could explain, another call came through. Legal, compliance, investor relations. His assistant rushed in. "Sir, trading just halted." Harrington stood up so fast his chair slid back. "That's impossible." The screen on the wall refreshed. Harrington and Co. Trading suspended. At 9:01 a.m., federal agents entered the lobby. At 9:03 a.m., the board demanded an emergency call. At 9:05 a.m., news alerts exploded. Federal investigation launched into Harrington and Coal Industries. Harrington's world began to tilt. "This is sabotage," he growled. "Someone is trying to destroy us." The head of compliance whispered. "Sir, the disclosures were automatic." "What disclosures?" The system triggered full transparency protocols. Harrington froze. "No one can trigger those." The compliance officer swallowed. "Yes, sir. One person can." The assistant's voice shook. The name attached to the trigger authorization. Harrington felt a cold weight in his chest. "Is Elias Grant." "The janitor." "No," Harrington said. "That's not possible." But it was. 15 years earlier, Elias Grant co-founded a startup called Grant & Co. Financial Systems. Elias was the architect, the designer, the ethical backbone. He built systems that couldn't be corrupted without consequences. Richard Harrington provided the money, and eventually the betrayal. Harrington forced Elias out through legal maneuvering. What he didn't know, Elias had embedded fail-safes. Fail-safes tied to ethics. Fail-safes tied to abuse of power. Fail-safes tied to termination without cause. And one final clause. If Elias Grant was ever fired from the company in any capacity, the system would initiate total transparency. Harrington had just pulled the trigger. At 9:12 a.m., Elias sat calmly in a black sedan across the street. Federal agents beside him. "You okay?" one asked. Elias nodded. "I knew this day would come." He watched the chaos inside the building. Phones ringing, people running, power crumbling. 10 minutes. By noon, Harrington was removed as CEO. By evening, he was indicted. Stockholders fled. Accounts were seized. Executives resigned. And Richard Harrington? He sat alone in a conference room, staring at the door, waiting. The door opened. Elias Grant walked in, not in a janitor's uniform, but in a tailored suit. Harrington stood slowly. "You planned this." Elias shook his head. "No, you did." They judged him by his uniform. They mistook silence for weakness. But power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more real-world lessons about power, patience, and justice. Because the next person you overlook might be the one who ends everything. They judged him by his uniform. They mistook silence for weakness. But power doesn't. The hotel lobby was designed to feel untouchable. Polished marble floors reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers. Soft piano music drifted through the air, carefully calibrated to calm wealthy guests after long flights and private meetings. Everything about the Grand Regent Hotel whispered exclusivity. Adrian Walker stood at the front desk, travel bag by her side. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the hotel manager said, his smile practiced and tight. "We're fully booked tonight." Adrian blinked once. "That's strange," she replied calmly. "I confirmed my reservation less than an hour ago." The manager didn't look at the computer. He didn't need to. "There must have been an error," he said. Adrian followed his eyes as they drifted, past her face, past her luggage, lingering just long enough on her clothes, her hair, her skin. Behind him, 2 check-in stations were empty. A bellman leaned against the wall, bored. The hotel wasn't full. The manager simply didn't want her here. What he didn't know was that in less than 10 minutes, someone would walk through those doors who exposed exactly how fragile his authority really was. Adrian had spent most of her life learning how to remain calm when people underestimated her. She was 41 years old, a senior urban development consultant who worked with governments and private investors to redesign neglected city districts. Her job required diplomacy, patience, and the ability to read power dynamics instantly. She knew the difference between confusion and dismissal. This was dismissal. "Could you please check the system again?" Adrian asked. The manager sighed softly, as if indulging a child. "I already have." Adrian nodded. "Then I'd like written confirmation that my reservation was canceled without my consent." The request caught him off guard. "That won't be necessary." "It will," she said evenly. A moment passed. The manager cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you're unhappy, perhaps another hotel would better suit your needs." Adrian felt a familiar weight settle in her chest. Not anger, not surprise, but recognition. She had been here before. Different city, different hotel. Same quiet message. "You don't belong." The Grand Regent prided itself on discretion. Celebrities booked entire floors. Politicians slipped in through private entrances. Billionaires stayed for weeks at a time and never once spoke to the front desk. Staff were trained to anticipate needs, sometimes before guests even asked. But there were unspoken rules. Certain guests received warmth automatically. Others were scrutinized, questioned, managed. Adrian knew those rules well. She'd seen how people like her were treated differently the moment no one important was watching. Tonight, no one important was supposed to be watching. Evan Hope believed he was good at his job. At 36, he'd worked his way from concierge to floor supervisor to front-of-house manager in less than 10 years. He wore tailored suits and spoke with polished neutrality. Evan protected the hotel's image fiercely. To him, guests were either assets or liabilities. Adrian didn't look dangerous. She looked like someone who might complain. Someone who might ask too many questions. Someone who didn't fit the aesthetic he'd learned to preserve. So he stuck to his version of policy. "No rooms," he repeated. When Adrian stepped aside to sit in the lobby, Evan exhaled quietly. Situation handled. Or so he thought. Adrian sat with her posture straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She observed. Guests arrived after her. White couples, business travelers, tourists. Evan greeted them warmly. "Welcome to the Grand Regent." Keys were handed out. Smiles exchanged. Adrian noted the times, the sequence, the details. Then she pulled out her phone and typed a message. "They're denying my room." "I'm okay." She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Marcus Walker did not rush. He arrived exactly 12 minutes after Adrian's message. At 6'2", he carried himself with quiet certainty. He wore dark jeans, a tailored jacket, no tie, nothing flashy. Nothing accidental. When he entered the lobby, the energy shifted. The bellman straightened. The concierge looked up instantly. Marcus scanned the room once. Then he saw Adrian. He walked directly to her. "You okay?" he asked softly. Adrian nodded. "I will be." They approached the desk together. Evan looked up, already adjusting his tone. "Good evening, sir. How may I assist you?" Marcus spoke calmly. "My wife has a confirmed reservation. She was told the hotel is fully booked." Evan forced a polite smile. "That's correct." Marcus nodded slowly. "May I have your name?" Evan hesitated. "Evan Ho." "And the general manager?" "She's unavailable." "That's fine," Marcus said. "We'll wait." Something about his voice unsettled Evan. Not anger, certainty. Marcus stepped a few feet away and made a call. "Yes, I'm the Grand Regent," he said quietly. A pause. "No, I'll wait." He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Evan's confidence faltered. "Sir," he said quickly, "perhaps we can assist you with another nearby property." "No," Marcus replied calmly. "We won't." Staff nearby began paying attention. Whispers started. Adrian remained silent. Marcus Walker was not a celebrity. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't loud. Marcus was the chief operating officer of Meridian Hospitality Group, the parent company, the one that owned the Grand Regent and 14 other luxury hotels across 3 continents. He rarely visited properties unannounced. He never introduced himself unless necessary. And he never forgot how people treated others when they thought no one important was watching. 5 minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Claire Whitman stepped out. Her face tightened when she saw Marcus. "Mr. Walker," she said quickly, "I wasn't aware you were on property." Marcus met her gaze. "My wife was," he replied. The lobby went silent. Claire turned to Evan. "Is that true?" Evan's mouth opened, closed. There was a reservation discrepancy. Adrian spoke calmly. "2 guests checked in after me. He didn't check the system." Claire inhaled sharply. "Evan," she said coldly, "step away from the desk." Security moved closer. Guests pretended not to listen, but everyone was listening. "I am deeply sorry, Mrs. Walker," Claire said. "This does not reflect our standards." Adrian met her eyes. "Then your standards need enforcement." Keys were produced. An upgrade offered. Complimentary services promised. Adrian declined them all. Evan was escorted to the back office. His badge removed. By morning, he would be terminated. Later that night, Marcus met privately with Claire. Documentation was reviewed. Security footage examined. Patterns identified. Evan Holt's actions were not isolated. Mandatory retraining was issued across all properties. Not because of Marcus's position, but because of what had been exposed. In their suite, Adrian stood by the window overlooking the city. "You didn't raise your voice," she said. Marcus smiled faintly. "Yelling is easy," he replied. "Listening is harder." She took his hand. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to breathe. The incident never made the news. It didn't need to. Changes happened quietly. New policies. New oversight, new consequences. And for Adrian, something else settled in. Not vindication, validation. The hotel manager denied a black woman a room. He thought power looked a certain way. He thought it announced itself loudly. But real power often walks in quietly and stands beside the person you decided didn't belong. And for Adrian, something else settled in. Not vindication. The boy stood there with his hand half raised, not begging, not crying, just waiting. The millionaire didn't slow down, didn't look at the boy's face, didn't hear the question forming in his mouth. He brushed past him like the kid was part of the sidewalk, like a shadow that didn't matter. The boy's hand stayed raised for a second longer, then slowly dropped. Years later, in a quiet hospital room filled with machines that measured everything except meaning, that same man will remember that moment with painful clarity. Not the deals, not the money, not the buildings with his name engraved on them, but the boy he chose not to see. Leonard Whitmore believed in momentum. You moved fast or you got left behind. You seized opportunities or watched other people take them. That belief had made him rich. At 56, Leonard was worth more than most people could imagine. Tech investments, commercial real estate, quiet stakes in companies that touched millions of lives. Business magazines called him visionary. Disciplined, unemotional in the best way. Leonard liked that description. Emotion complicated things. Emotion slowed decisions. He preferred numbers. That afternoon, he exited the Grand Helix Hotel. Phone pressed his ear, mind already racing ahead to the next meeting. His driver waited at the curb. His assistant walked half a step behind, tapping notes into a tablet. Time was currency, and Leonard hated wasting it. The boy had been sitting there for nearly an hour. His name was Caleb Morris, and he was 11 years old. Too thin for his age. Hoodie 2 sizes too big. Shoes with the soles peeling open at the front. He sat on the wide stone steps near the hotel entrance, backpack at his feet, watching people pass. Most of them didn't look at him. Some tightened their grip on their bags. A few frowned, like his presence lowered the value of the place. Caleb wasn't supposed to be there, but he was lost. His mother worked nights cleaning office buildings. That morning, she dropped him off near downtown before his shift ended, thinking he could find his way to the public library. The library was his safe place. Free internet, quiet corners, warm in the winter, but he'd taken the wrong bus. Now, he didn't know where he was. When Caleb saw Leonard step out of the hotel, confident, well-dressed, surrounded by people who seemed to orbit him, he stood up, not because he knew who Leonard was, but because grown men like that always seem to have answers. "Excuse me, sir," Caleb said softly. Leonard didn't hear him. He was already walking. Caleb took a step closer. "Sir, I just wanted to ask." Leonard shifted his phone to his other ear and moved around him without breaking stride. The boy's words dissolved into the noise of the street. Cars passed. Shoes clicked on stone. Someone laughed nearby. Caleb stood there, frozen, watching the man disappear into a waiting car. The door closed. The car pulled away. And just like that, the moment was over. No one stopped. No one noticed. Caleb slowly lowered his hand. Caleb hadn't been asking for money. He hadn't been asking for food. He'd been asking for directions. That was all. He waited another 10 minutes before approaching someone else. A woman in a business suit. She shook her head without slowing down. A couple avoided eye contact. Finally, a security guard pointed him toward a bus stop. By the time Caleb reached the library, it was nearly closing. He sat at a computer and stared at the blank screen for a long time. Not angry, just aware. That day taught him something he never forgot. Some people don't see you. Not because they're cruel, but because you don't register as important enough to notice. Caleb's life didn't change dramatically after that day. It just kept going. School was hard, but he was smart. Teachers noticed. One counselor pushed him toward a summer program for kids with potential. He worked part-time jobs as soon as he was old enough. Stocked shelves, cleaned floors, delivered groceries. He learned to move quietly. He learned to listen. And he learned never to expect help from people who looked powerful. That lesson stayed with him longer than any textbook. Leonard Whitmore never thought about the boy again. Why would he? He closed deals, expanded portfolios, bought another condo he barely used. He donated to charities his assistant selected, attended galas when it benefited his image, gave speeches about discipline and self-reliance. From the outside, his life looked complete. From the inside, it was efficient, clean, lonely in a way he didn't acknowledge. Caleb graduated high school near the top of his class. College wasn't guaranteed, but scholarships came through. He studied computer science, spending nights in labs, weekends tutoring classmates for extra money. He didn't party. He didn't network aggressively. He built things, small systems, efficient tools, programs that solved problems people ignored because they weren't glamorous. After graduation, he took contract work, hospital systems, nonprofits, underfunded institutions that needed quiet fixes, not flashy innovation. His reputation grew slowly, not loud enough for headlines, strong enough for trust. Leonard's health failed faster than his money ever had. The diagnosis came suddenly. Aggressive, unforgiving. Doctors spoke carefully, but the truth was clear. Money couldn't negotiate with biology. Leonard found himself confined to a private hospital room overlooking a city he no longer moved through. Meetings happened without him. Deals slowed. The world didn't stop just because he did. One afternoon, a young consultant was brought in to assess a data failure in the hospital systems. The man entered with a tablet under his arm. "Good afternoon," he said. "I'm Caleb Morris." Leonard barely looked up. "Fix whatever's broken," he said. "Talk to my assistant." Caleb paused, then looked at Leonard's face and froze. Caleb recognized him instantly. Older, thinner, but unmistakable. The hotel steps. The phone pressed to his ear. The way he hadn't slowed down. Leonard noticed the pause. "What?" he snapped. "Is there a problem?" Caleb swallowed. "No, sir," he said calmly. "I'll take care of it." And he did, quietly, efficiently, professionally. But as he turned to leave, Leonard spoke again. "Wait," he said. "What did you say your name was?" "Caleb," he replied. "Caleb Morris." Something shifted inside Leonard. That night, Leonard couldn't sleep. A memory surfaced. Hotel steps. A boy's voice. A hand raised halfway. He had ignored dozens of people like that over the years. But this one felt different, because the boy had grown up and walked back into his life without needing anything from him. Leonard asked his assistant to bring Caleb back the next day. When Caleb entered, Leonard studied him more closely. "You look familiar," Leonard said slowly. Caleb nodded. "I should." Silence stretched. "Years ago," Leonard said. "Did we meet?" "Yes," Caleb replied. "Briefly." Leonard swallowed. "I didn't stop." "No," Caleb said. "You didn't." Leonard nodded once. "I should have." Caleb considered him. "Maybe," he said, "but that moment taught me something important." "What?" Leonard asked. "That I couldn't build my life waiting for someone else to notice me." Leonard offered help. Funding. Connections. Opportunities. Caleb declined politely. "I'm doing fine," he said, and he meant it. For the first time in his life, Leonard understood something money couldn't fix. Some moments don't come back. Leonard Whitmore passed away months later. His obituary listed accomplishments. Buildings. Companies. Donations. It didn't mention a boy on hotel steps. But Caleb remembered. And every time he saw someone standing uncertainly, looking lost, he stopped. The millionaire ignored the poor black kid. Years later, he regretted it. Not because the kid failed, but because he didn't. Sometimes the smallest moments carry the longest consequences. The next person you overlook might be the one who reminds you who you could have been. She laughed at him, not quietly, not awkwardly. She laughed the kind of laugh meant to remind everyone nearby exactly who had power and who didn't. A black street vendor stood behind a small folding table, hands calm, eyes steady, while she picked apart everything about him. His clothes, his work, his place in the world. People slowed down to watch. Some were uncomfortable. Some were entertained. Most said nothing. Then the vendor reached down, picked up a leather-bound journal, and turned it toward her. The laughter stopped, because written in gold across the cover was her name. And from that moment on, the woman who thought she owned everything began to lose control of it all. Vivian Ashford did not consider herself cruel. That was how she justified everything. She believed she was direct, efficient, honest in a world that rewarded weakness. Vivian had inherited wealth, but she had multiplied it. Real estate, private equity, philanthropy that doubled as tax shelters and influence pipelines. Her name appeared on plaques, donor lists, and gala programs printed on paper thicker than most people's resumes. Riverside Plaza was one of her proudest acquisitions, an outdoor luxury shopping district designed to feel public, but curated to exclude anyone who didn't fit the image. No panhandlers, no noise, No reminders of struggle. That morning, Vivian stepped out of her black SUV, already irritated. Her assistant had canceled at the last minute. A journalist had emailed twice in 1 week. And a boutique manager had dared to say the words, "We don't have that in stock." Vivian adjusted her sunglasses and started toward the plaza's center corridor. And then she saw something that didn't belong. Samuel Carter had arrived before sunrise. He always did. The plaza was quiet at that hour, the air cool and clean before luxury perfumes replaced it. He unfolded his table slowly, methodically, the way his father had taught him. Never rushed the setup. Each journal was placed by hand. Leather covers, hand-stitched spines, names embossed in gold. Samuel didn't shout to attract customers. He believed shouting begged for attention, and he had learned long ago that attention was dangerous. Instead, he stood quietly, observing. He noticed who looked at the journals but didn't stop, who slowed down, who pretended not to see him at all. This spot wasn't random. Samuel had chosen it carefully, because everyone passed through Riverside Plaza, eventually, especially her. Vivian didn't look where she was walking, so when her heel clipped the edge of Samuel's table, she stopped abruptly. "What is this?" she snapped. Samuel looked up. "Good morning, ma'am." That calmness irritated her immediately. "You're blocking the walkway," she said, gesturing dismissively. "This is a premium retail space." "I'm within the permitted area," Samuel replied, pointing to the painted boundary line on the pavement. Vivian scoffed. "Oh, please, don't insult my intelligence." She picked up one of the journals, holding it like it might stain her fingers. "What are these supposed to be?" "Handmade journals," Samuel said. "Personalized." "Personalized?" she laughed. "How much?" $40. Her laughter echoed. $40, she repeated. "For this." She dropped the journal back onto the table. "You people really don't know your limits." The words hung in the air. A couple nearby slowed to a stop. A shop employee pretended to rearrange a display while listening. Samuel didn't raise his voice. "My limits," he said, "are not yours to define." Vivian's smile tightened. "You should be grateful they even let you stand here." Vivian said, louder now, "This plaza isn't meant for street vendors." Samuel met her eyes. "It's meant for people," he replied. That was the moment her patience snapped. She turned sharply toward a nearby security guard. "Why is this allowed?" The guard hesitated. "Ma'am, he has a valid permit." Vivian laughed sharply. "Then revoke it. This cheapens the entire environment." She leaned closer to Samuel. "Pack this up," she said coldly, "before you embarrass yourself further." A pause. Samuel reached down and picked up one journal. "This one's already finished," he said gently. "It's yours." She scoffed. "I don't buy trash off the sidewalk." Samuel turned the journal toward her. Gold letters caught the sunlight. "V. Ashford." Everything stopped. Vivian stared. Her mouth opened, then closed. "That's my name," she said slowly. "How do you know my name?" Samuel didn't answer. He opened the journal. Inside were neat, deliberate entries. Dates, property addresses, company transfers, trusts within trusts. Vivian's breath caught. "These are private," she whispered. Samuel looked at her steadily. "I know." She snapped the journal shut. "Who are you?" Samuel exhaled. "My name," he said, "is Samuel Carter." Her face drained of color. "No," she said immediately. "That's not possible." Daniel Carter. The name echoed in her mind like a door slamming shut. A former partner. A brilliant systems analyst. A man who trusted her. Too much. He signed away his shares, Vivian said defensively. "Legally." Samuel nodded. "After your lawyers buried him in revisions," he replied calmly, "after you promised protection you never intended to give." People had gathered now. Phones were out. Vivian lowered her voice. "You need to be very careful what you're accusing me of." Samuel smiled faintly. "My father was careful," he said. "That's why I'm standing here." After his father died, Samuel didn't protest. He didn't sue. He didn't scream. He studied finance, law, forensic accounting. He worked jobs that made him invisible. Warehouse shifts, delivery routes, street vending. Because invisibility was freedom, and patience was power. Vivian laughed nervously. You expect anyone to believe this? Samuel gestured around. They already do. He reached beneath the table and pulled out a folder. Official. Stamped. I submitted everything last week, he said calmly. Today was just to see if you'd recognize your own name. Her phone vibrated. Once. Twice. Again. A message stood out. Emergency board meeting. Now. News vans pulled into the plaza. Reporters rushed forward. Ms. Ashford, are you under investigation? Is it true your foundation is being audited? Security moved, not toward Samuel. Toward her. Ma'am, a guard said carefully, we need to clear this area. Vivian looked at Samuel. You planned this, she whispered. Samuel shook his head. No, he said. You did. I just waited. Vivian stood frozen as the crowd shifted. The same people who ignored Samuel now watched her. Phones raised. Judging. For the first time, she understood what it felt like to lose control in public. You told me to know my place, Samuel said quietly. This was always mine. Within weeks, Vivian Asher resigned from every board. Her assets were frozen pending investigation. Her foundation dissolved under scrutiny. Her name was removed from the plaza. And Samuel? He never returned to the table. The journal sold out, because every name has a story, and some stories wait patiently to be read. She thought money erased the past. She thought silence meant weakness. But the people you overlook today may be holding tomorrow's truth. Like, subscribe, share, because respect costs nothing. And arrogance always sends a bill later. The music inside the club was loud enough to shake the sidewalk. Bass thumped through concrete. Purple and blue lights flashed through tinted windows. Laughter spilled out every time the door opened. It was Friday night, prime time. A long line of people stretched down the block, dressed in expensive clothes, buzzing with anticipation. At the front of the line stood a man who didn't look like he was there to impress anyone. Black, mid-40s, tall, solid, broad-shouldered, but relaxed. Clean dark jeans, polished boots, a plain black jacket zipped halfway up. Nothing flashy, nothing sloppy, just quiet confidence. He stepped forward as the line moved. The bouncer raised his hand. Hold up. The man stopped. Yes, he said calmly. The bouncer barely glanced at him. Not tonight. The man blinked. I'm sorry. The bouncer crossed his arms. Club's full. The man looked past him. The dance floor inside was half empty. The bar had open stools. The VIP section had space. Behind him in line, a group of white college-age men laughed loudly, already half drunk. The bouncer stepped aside and waved them in. Go ahead, guys. The men brushed past, one of them shoulder-checking the black man as he entered. The man said nothing. He watched. Then he asked one quiet question. Is that your final decision? The bouncer smirked. Yeah, move along. The man nodded once. And in less than 20 minutes, that club would be completely shut down. Most people would have reacted. They would have raised their voice, pulled out their phone, argued about fairness. David Coleman did none of that. He stepped to the side of the entrance and leaned casually against the brick wall, hands in his jacket pockets. Not defeated. Waiting. David had learned patience in places where impatience got people killed. 22 years in the United States Army had taught him that. He'd stood guard in deserts where the heat cooked your thoughts. He'd waited in silence for hours in hostile territory, listening for footsteps that never came. A bouncer with an attitude? That wasn't pressure. That was information. David Coleman was 46 years old. He had enlisted at 19. Infantry first, then special operations support, then logistics and compliance, because leadership noticed he had a mind for detail. Over 2 decades of service, multiple deployments, medals he kept in a box he never opened. He'd buried friends. He'd held dying men who whispered names they loved. When he retired, he didn't chase attention. He didn't wear his service like a badge in civilian life. He believed respect wasn't demanded. It was earned. Tonight, he was in the city for a veterans fundraising weekend, a quiet event supporting housing and mental health programs for retired service members. Earlier that evening, he'd shaken hands with city officials, nonprofit leaders, and former officers. Now, he just wanted to join his friends for one drink. The bouncer's name was Kyle Mercer, 6'3", gym-built, mid-20s. Kyle loved this job, not because of the pay, because of the power. For 8 hours a night, he decided who mattered, who was cool enough, who fit the vibe, who deserved access. And tonight, he had already made up his mind about David. Kyle leaned toward the second bouncer and muttered, loud enough to be heard, "They always try." David heard every word. He didn't flinch, because soldiers don't waste energy on noise. They wait for the signal. Inside the club, near the back VIP section, sat 4 people at a reserve table. 3 men, 1 woman. They were dressed sharply, but not obnoxiously. No shouting, no bottle sparklers. They looked observant. One of the men checked his watch. Coleman said he'd be here 10 minutes ago. Another frowned. He's never late. The woman stood. I'll go see what's taking him so long. She walked toward the entrance and froze. David stood outside, calm as stone. She stared at him, then at the bouncer, then back at David. Her jaw tightened. "Why aren't you inside?" she asked. David smiled faintly. "Apparently I didn't meet the criteria." Her expression changed instantly. Not angry. Cold. "Oh," she said. She turned and walked straight back to the table. That club just made a catastrophic mistake. The man who stood up first was Thomas Avery. Most people would have assumed he was just another well-dressed customer. They would have been very wrong. Thomas Avery was a senior investigator for the State Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control. He had spent 15 years shutting down bars, clubs, and venues that violated licensing laws, safety regulations, and civil rights statutes. The woman? Lena Ortiz, city licensing and compliance. She had the authority to suspend business operations on the spot. The other 2 men? Former military officers who now worked in federal consulting. And David? David Coleman was a federal compliance consultant who specialized in discrimination cases involving nightlife venues. The fundraiser earlier that evening? It had been attended by the mayor's chief of staff. This wasn't coincidence. This was karma warming up. Kyle the bouncer was enjoying himself. The line was long. The power felt good. Then David stepped back toward the entrance. Kyle rolled his eyes. "I already told you." David held up his phone. "I'm just going to make a call." Kyle laughed loudly. "Go ahead. Call the president for all I care." David nodded calmly. "That won't be necessary." He stepped aside and dialed 1 number. The phone rang once. "Tom," David said quietly, "I'm being denied entry." There was a pause. "For what reason?" Tom asked. David glanced at Kyle. "No reason given." Another pause. Then Tom's voice sharpened. "Stay exactly where you are." David hung up and waited. 2 minutes later, the club door opened again. Lena Ortiz stepped outside. She didn't flash a badge immediately. She approached Kyle politely. "Good evening," she said. Kyle straightened. "Club's at capacity." Lena looked past him, at the half-empty floor, at the bar. She smiled thinly. "Interesting." She pulled out her badge. "I'm with City Licensing and Compliance." Kyle's confidence cracked. I'll get the manager." "That would be wise," she replied. The manager, Rick Dawson, hurried out moments later. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked, forcing a smile. Lena pointed to David. This man was denied entry. Rick looked at David, then at Kyle. "Why?" Kyle hesitated. He didn't meet dress code. Rick glanced at the posted dress code sign. Jeans allowed. Jackets allowed. No athletic wear. David complied with everything. Rick felt sweat bead on his neck. Lena crossed her arms. "Is that the official explanation?" Kyle stayed silent. That silence was louder than any confession. Thomas Avery stepped outside. When Rick saw him, his face went pale. "Mr. Avery," Rick stammered. "This is—" Tom raised a hand. "Stop." He turned to David. "Were you denied entry based on race?" David didn't raise his voice. "Yes." Kyle exploded. "That's not true." Tom looked at him calmly. "Sir, from this moment forward, anything you say may be included in a formal report." Kyle's mouth snapped shut. Lena pulled out a tablet. "In the last 12 months," she said, "this establishment has received 3 formal complaints alleging discriminatory entry practices." Rick's face drained. "You were investigated," Lena continued, "and warned." She tapped the screen. "Tonight confirms a pattern." Rick swallowed hard. "We can explain." "No," Lena said. "You can close." Inside the club, the DJ's music cut off mid-beat. The lights snapped on. People groaned. "What's going on?" someone shouted. Voice crackled over the intercom. "Attention, patrons. Due to an emergency compliance issue, the venue is closing immediately. Please exit in an orderly fashion." Confusion erupted. Anger followed. People poured toward the exits. Phones came out. Whispers spread. "Did they get raided?" "Someone say discrimination?" "Who got denied?" Outside, Rick pleaded. "You can't do this on a Friday night." Lena held up her tablet. "License suspended pending review. Effective immediately." Kyle's knees nearly buckled. "What?" he whispered. David stepped forward. Kyle finally looked at him, not as a nuisance, but as the reason his job was disappearing. "You should have just let him in," someone muttered from the crowd. Rick turned to David. "This was a misunderstanding." David shook his head. "No, it wasn't." He looked at Kyle. "You judged me without knowing me." Kyle said nothing. David continued. "I spent over 20 years serving a country that promised equality." His voice was calm, but heavy. "Tonight, you broke that promise." Kyle stared at the ground. Police arrived to assist with crowd control. The club was emptied. Neon lights shut off. Silence replaced bass. Rick sank onto the curb. Kyle was fired on the spot. 6 weeks later, the club reopened under new ownership, new management, mandatory civil rights training. The city didn't play around. David Coleman didn't celebrate. He went back to the fundraiser, back to his friends, back to a quiet life. Because he didn't shut down the club out of anger. He shut it down because dignity matters. And sometimes, the man you deny at the door is the man who knows exactly how the system works. Sometimes, justice doesn't need yelling. It just needs one calm phone call. The courtroom fell silent as 2 police officers grabbed the man by his arms. Not the kind of silence that comes naturally. The kind that crashes down suddenly. Heavy, uncomfortable, unavoidable. "Time's up. You've had your fun," one officer sneered, fingers digging into fabric and skin. The black man didn't resist. He didn't jerk away, didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He slowly stood, confusion written across his face. Not fear, not panic, but genuine disbelief. "I'm not causing any trouble," he said calmly. His voice didn't shake. That only seemed to irritate them more. They dragged him toward the exit as whispers erupted around the room. Low at first, then louder. "Who is he? Why is he being removed?" He must have done something. Assumptions filled the air faster than facts ever could. The judge hadn't arrived yet. The bailiff stared straight ahead. Not because he didn't see what was happening, but because looking away was easier than getting involved. Phones quietly started recording. Not openly, not boldly, just enough to capture the moment. People had learned. Just before the heavy wooden doors closed behind him, a loud voice echoed through the courtroom. Clear, authoritative, unmistakable. "Mr. Carter, please come forward." Everything stopped. The officers froze mid-step. The whispers died instantly. The air shifted. And in that single moment, everything changed. 42 years old. Simple gray suit. Worn-out shoes with scuff soles and creases from years of walking courthouse halls. To everyone else, he looked like just another poor defendant, another man waiting to have his fate decided by strangers, another name on a docket no one would remember by the end of the day. But what they didn't know, what no one in that room had bothered to ask, was that Elliot Carter was a civil rights attorney. Not the loud kind, not the flashy kind, the kind who worked quietly, relentlessly, methodically, one of the most powerful in the state, a man who had argued cases before the Supreme Court and made seasoned justices uncomfortable, a man whose lawsuits had forced police departments to change policies they swore were standard procedure, a man whose name didn't trend on social media, but whose presence made city officials nervous. But today, he wasn't here as a lawyer. He wasn't here to argue. He wasn't here to defend anyone. He was here as a witness, a key witness, in a corruption case involving the city police department, a case that had been building for years beneath the surface. And the officers dragging him toward the exit, they were connected directly to the very corruption he was about to expose. Elliot arrived at the courthouse before most of the city was awake. The sky hung low and gray, heavy with clouds that looked like they might break, but never did. He parked several blocks away. Not because he had to, because he always did. Walking gave him time to think, to remember, to steady himself. He adjusted the strap of his old leather briefcase and climbed the courthouse steps one at a time. Security barely looked up as he passed through the metal detector. No greeting, no acknowledgement, just another black man in a neutral suit. Inside the courtroom, the space felt cold. Clerks shuffled papers quietly. A court reporter tested her microphone. Two officers leaned against the wall, laughing too loudly for a room meant to command respect. Elliot chose a seat in the back row, not the front, never the front. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his notes. Not legal arguments, not opinions, facts, names, dates, times, documents that had taken years to collect, emails officers thought were deleted, recordings never meant to be heard outside locker rooms, bank transfers hidden behind shell accounts. Each file represented a life disrupted, a family broken, a future redirected by a badge worn without accountability. Elliot took a slow breath. This isn't about you, he reminded himself. It never was. Officer Brad Collins sat like the courtroom belonged to him, legs spread, arms crossed, laughing louder than necessary. 35 years old, broad shoulders, close-cut hair, the kind of man who mistook confidence for authority and authority for immunity. Court days made him uneasy. Too many eyes, too many people who could question him, too many lawyers who didn't flinch. Then he noticed Elliot, quiet, still, focused on his phone, not nervous, not fidgeting. That calm bothered Collins. Hey, he muttered to his partner, nodding toward Elliot. Look at this guy, probably waiting to beg the judge for mercy. They laughed. Collins stood, straightened his uniform, and walked over. You lost, buddy? Collins asked, voice coated in sarcasm. Elliot looked up. Calm. No, he said. I'm right where I need to be. Collins scoffed. This section for lawyers and officials. Elliot smiled politely. I'm aware. Collins leaned closer. You don't look important. The insult was deliberate, calculated. Elliot met his eyes. I don't need to look important. Something snapped. Move, Collins said, before you embarrass yourself. Elliot didn't move. I'm waiting for my name to be called. Collins laughed. Sure you are. He grabbed Elliot's arm. You're disturbing court proceedings. Gasps rippled across the room. Sir, Elliot said evenly, there's no need for this. But Collins had already decided. Resisting, he shouted. Another officer rushed over. Take him out. As they pulled him toward the exit, Elliot felt heat rise in his chest. Not anger. Memory. He was 9 years old again, standing on cracked concrete, watching his father press against a squad car, hands cuffed, face bleeding, neighbors watching from windows, no one intervening, his father's voice calm, the officers not listening. That was the day Elliot learned silence could be weaponized. That memory pushed him through law school, through unpaid internships, through cases no one wanted. And now, here he was, dragged like a criminal. "You're making a mistake," Elliot said quietly. Collins laughed. "You people always say that. I'm the witness in the Reynolds case." For half a second, just half, Collins hesitated, then laughed harder. "Good one." The doors opened. They started pulling him outside. "Where is Mr. Carter?" The voice thundered through the courtroom. The judge had entered. Every head snapped forward. The bailiff swallowed hard. He was just removed, Your Honor." The judge's face darkened. "Removed?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" No one answered. The judge leaned forward. "Bring him back. Now." The officers turned slowly, faces draining of color. Collins swallowed. They escorted Elliot back inside. Every eye followed. The judge looked directly at him. "Mr. Carter, are you all right?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Why was he removed?" the judge demanded. Collins stammered. He was disrupting court. Elliot spoke calmly. "I was sitting quietly." The judge turned to him. "Please state your full name for the record." "Elliot James Carter." The room reacted instantly. Gasps. Whispers. "That's him. I've heard of him. He sued the city." The judge nodded. "Renowned civil rights attorney." Collins went pale. "You are the key witness in today's corruption trial," the judge continued. "And you were illegally detained in my courtroom." The gavel slammed. Officer Collins stepped forward. "Did you put your hands on a witness?" "Yes." "Without cause?" "Yes." "Bailiff." The judge said calmly, "Detain Officer Collins." "What?" Collins panicked. "This is a misunderstanding." "Handcuffs." The click echoed. The same cuffs Collins had used on others, now locked around his wrists. When Elliot took the stand, the room leaned forward. He spoke clearly, methodically, without anger, without theatrics. He laid out bribery, evidence tampering, false arrests, planted drugs, racial profiling, names, dates, documents, recordings played through courtroom speakers, email projected onto screens, bank transfers traced line by line. This wasn't opinion. This was fact. By the time he finished, several officers were arrested, including Collins. Outside, reporters swarmed. "How does it feel?" Elliot paused. "I don't feel victorious. I feel tired. Tired of watching people without my voice get crushed." He looked into the camera. "Today it was me. Tomorrow it could be anyone." That night, Elliot visited his father's grave. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "They won't drag us in silence anymore." The story went viral. Millions watched. Protests erupted. Policies changed. Officers were fired. Some arrested. Justice, slow and imperfect, began to breathe again. Elliot returned to work, helping families, fighting cases, saving lives, because power isn't about titles. It's about purpose. They dragged me out thinking I was nobody, but nobody doesn't change laws. I do. The courtroom was quiet, but not respectful. It was the kind of quiet that came from boredom, from people who had already decided how the story would end. Judge Harold Whitman leaned forward in his chair, fingers interlocked, eyes fixed on the man standing before him. Marcus Reed, a poor black man in a worn-out suit that looked like it had seen too many winters and not enough dry cleaners. The judge sighed loudly, making sure everyone heard it. "So," he said, his voice dripping with disbelief, "you expect this court to believe that you're innocent?" Marcus didn't answer right away. The judge tilted his head and smirked. A man with no fixed address, no current employer, and barely enough money to dress himself properly. A few quiet laughs rippled through the gallery. Marcus felt them like punches. The judge continued. "I mean, really, if you wanted sympathy, you picked the wrong courtroom." Marcus finally spoke. Softly, "You might remember me, Your Honor." The judge laughed. But 10 minutes later, no one in that courtroom would be laughing anymore. Marcus stood at the defense table with his hands folded in front of him, not because he was scared, because he had learned a long time ago that stillness unsettled people more than anger ever could. He was 46 years old, but the stress etched into his face made him look older. Deep lines framed his eyes. His beard was peppered with gray he hadn't earned through age, but through loss. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. To Marcus, it smelled like judgment. The charge was serious: grand theft and assault. According to police report, Marcus had walked into a high-end electronics store in downtown Chicago and attempted to steal a $2,400 laptop. When store security confronted him, he allegedly became violent. That was the version everyone else believed. But Marcus knew the truth. And he knew something else, too. This wasn't really about the laptop. It never was. Judge Harold Whitman had been on the bench for over 2 decades. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and proud of his reputation as a straight shooter. In his mind, that meant efficiency. No nonsense. No excuses. He believed criminals followed patterns, and he believed he could spot them within seconds. And Marcus Reed fit the pattern perfectly. Black, poor, quiet. Whitman glanced at the case file again, barely reading it. Another day, another defendant, another lesson to be taught. Mr. Reed. The judge said sharply, "You understand the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You're accused of stealing expensive merchandise and assaulting store security." "That's not a misunderstanding, that's a felony." Marcus nodded. "I understand." Whitman raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" His eyes scanned Marcus from head to toe. "Because from where I'm sitting, this looks pretty clear." Daniel Crane stood up smoothly. Designer suit, perfect hair, expensive watch that caught the light just enough to remind everyone who he was. "Your Honor," Crane said, "the state is prepared to move forward immediately." He turned toward the jury. The defendant was caught at the scene. Security personnel will testify that Mr. Reed became aggressive when confronted. Crane paused for effect. This was an accident. This was a choice. He glanced at Marcus. "And frankly, this isn't the kind of store a man like him belongs in." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Not because of fear, because he'd heard that sentence before. Too many times. The public defender, a young woman named Alicia Moreno, stood next. She was competent, but overworked, underpaid, and painfully aware of the uphill battle. "Your Honor," she began, "my client maintains that he did not steal anything. We believe the store surveillance footage." Judge Whitman waved his hand. "We'll get to that when we get to it." He looked back at Marcus. "Mr. Reed, I want to hear from you directly." Marcus straightened. "Yes, sir." "Why were you in that store?" "I was there to purchase a laptop." Whitman chuckled. "With what money?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. "Mr. Reed," the judge pressed, "I had the money." The judge laughed openly this time. "Oh, come on." The courtroom felt warmer now. Heavy. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Let me guess," he said. "You were just browsing. Then somehow the laptop jumped into your hands, and security magically misunderstood the situation." A few jurors shifted uncomfortably. Marcus took a slow breath. "No, Your Honor." "Then enlighten us." Marcus hesitated. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew what would happen once he said it. "I asked a sales associate for help," Marcus said. "I selected a laptop. I went to the register. And I paid." The judge rolled his eyes. "Do you have proof?" "Yes." The judge scoffed. "We'll see." Judge Whitman glanced at the clock. "Before we waste more time," he said, "is there anything else you'd like to say for yourself, Mr. Reed?" Marcus looked around the room, at the jurors who avoided his eyes, at the prosecutor who already saw him in prison, at the judge who had already written his story. "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "I'd like the court to review my background before making assumptions." Whitman smirked. "Oh, you think that'll help you?" "I do." "What? Should we be impressed?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir." The judge sighed dramatically. "All right, entertain us." Marcus swallowed. "I used to work in this building." The judge frowned. This courthouse? Yes. Crane laughed under his breath. As what? He asked. Maintenance. Marcus shook his head. No. The room grew quieter. I was a federal investigator. Silence slammed into courtroom. Judge Whitman laughed sharply. That's enough. Marcus slowly reached into his jacket. The bailiff stood. Sir, hands where I can see them. Marcus froze. Permission to present identification, Your Honor. The judge hesitated, then nodded. The bailiff retrieved the item and handed it to Judge Whitman. It was old, worn, but unmistakable. A federal badge. Judge Whitman opened it and felt his heart skip. U.S. Department of Justice. Internal Oversight Division. Name, Marcus Elijah Reed. The judge's face drained of color. That's not possible. Marcus spoke calmly. I investigated judicial misconduct. The courtroom erupted. Order! Whitman shouted, but his voice cracked. He stared at Marcus. Recognition flooded back. A man in a tailored suit. Sharp eyes. A witness stand. A case he'd rather forget. You, Whitman whispered. You were there. Yes, sir. Marcus turned to the jury. I joined the DOJ straight out of law enforcement. My unit investigated corruption. Judges, prosecutors, police. He paused. I testified in 3 major cases. Judge Whitman knew one of them. Very well. You disappeared, the judge said quietly. Marcus nodded. I was pushed out. The prosecutor sat down slowly, suddenly unsure. My last case exposed a task force tied to organized crime. Marcus continued. After that, the threat started. The room listened now. My wife died 2 years later. Cancer. Medical bills took everything. His voice trembled, but he didn't stop. I left the spotlight. Took contract work. Lived quietly. He looked at the judge. I didn't steal anything. Alicia Moreno stood. Your Honor, she said, we request the surveillance footage be played now. No objection. The screen flickered to life. Marcus at the register. His credit card. The receipt. Then security approaching aggressively, grabbing him first. The alleged assault was nothing but self-defense. The lie unraveled in real time. No one spoke. Judge Whitman cleared his throat. The charges against Mr. Reed are dismissed. Marcus closed his eyes, not in relief, in exhaustion. Your Honor, Marcus said. May I say one last thing? Whitman nodded stiffly. You mocked me, Marcus said, because I looked poor, because I was black, because you thought I didn't matter. He paused. I mattered before. The judge said nothing. I still do. Marcus Reed walked out a free man. Judge Whitman? An ethics investigation opened weeks later. All because of assumptions. Never judge someone by how they look. Because sometimes the person you mock today is the one who once held your future in his hands. Some nights pass quietly. Streetlights hum. Windows glow softly. Families settle into routine. And then there are nights that change lives forever. Friday night, 9:17 p.m. A quiet suburban street was suddenly flooded with flashing red and blue lights. The sound of sirens cut through the air like a warning no one had time to understand. Doors cracked open. Curtains shifted. Phones were raised instinctively. On the sidewalk, a black teenager lay face down on cold concrete, his cheek pressed against the ground, his breath uneven, his heart pounding, so loudly it felt like the world could hear it. I didn't do anything, he kept saying, but the officers didn't slow down. They didn't ask more questions. They didn't verify facts. They didn't hesitate. Metal handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. And in that moment, a mother somewhere across town felt something she couldn't explain. A sudden, crushing fear. This is the story of a black teen arrested without evidence. And the mother who refused to stay silent. Before the police lights. Before the cuffs. Before the fear. Jamal Carter was just a kid trying to survive adolescence. He was 17 years old. Tall, but still growing into his frame. Quiet in class, loud on the basketball court. He lived with his mother, Angela Carter, in a modest neighborhood where people knew each other's names, but rarely knew each other's struggles. Jamal wasn't perfect. He sometimes forgot chores, sometimes stayed up too late gaming, sometimes dragged his feet about homework, but he had never been in trouble with the law, never arrested, never suspended, never even given detention. Teachers described him as polite and focused. His coach described him as disciplined. To his mother, he was everything. Angela Carter had raised Jamal on her own since he was 6. She worked long hours as a hospital administrator, early mornings, late nights. She taught Jamal how to speak respectfully, how to keep his hands visible around police, how to stay calm no matter how unfair a situation felt. Lessons she never wanted to teach, but felt she had no choice but to. Always come home, she told him, no matter what. That Friday night, Jamal promised he would. At 8:54 p.m., Jamal sent his mother a text, leaving Marcus's house now, walking home. Angela replied moments later, "Be safe. Call me when you're close." The message showed as delivered, but Jamal never responded. 2 blocks away, someone dialed 911. The caller sounded uncertain. "There's, someone walking around. Looks suspicious." Dispatch asked for details. "Well, he's a black male. Teen. Hoodie. Walking slowly. No crime reported. No property damage. No victim identified. Just suspicion. And in some neighborhoods, that was enough." Jamal heard the police car slow behind him. A spotlight hit his back, blinding him. "Stop right there." Jamal froze, then slowly turned. Hands up, palms open. "What's going on, officer?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 2 officers stepped out. They asked rapid questions. "Where you coming from? Why are you out here? What's in your pockets?" Jamal answered honestly, "I'm walking home from my friend's house." They searched him. Empty pockets. No weapon. No stolen items. Still, something shifted. One officer stepped back and spoke quietly to the other. Then came the command, "Turn around." Jamal's stomach dropped. "Why?" he asked. "Did I do something?" "You fit the description," the officer said. Cold metal closed around his wrists. Jamal's voice cracked. "I didn't do anything wrong." The patrol car door opened. People began to gather. Some stood silently. Some whispered. Some recorded. No one intervened, because no one wanted to be next. At 9:29 p.m., Angela's phone rang. Unknown number. Her heart sank. "Ma'am, this is the police department. Your son has been detained." Detained. Not arrested. But Angela knew better. "Where is he?" She didn't wait for details. She grabbed her keys. Angela pulled up to flashing lights. Her son was sitting on the curb, handcuffed. Her chest tightened, but her face stayed calm. She stepped out of the car, and she pulled out her phone. Angela didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't touch the officers. She pressed record. "What is my son being detained for?" she asked clearly. The officers hesitated. "A possible burglary." Angela kept her voice steady. "Where did this burglary occur?" No answer. "What evidence do you have?" Silence. Angela opened her son's phone location history. Time-stamped. GPS verified. She pulled up text messages. Video doorbell footage from Marcus's house. "This shows where he was," she said calmly. "And this shows when he left." People leaned in. Phones zoomed. The officers shifted. One officer stepped aside and made a call. Another avoided the camera. The crowd grew. 36 minutes passed. Finally, the cuffs were removed. No apology, just a warning. Angela looked directly into her phone. This is what our children face every day. By morning, the video had millions of views. Headlines followed. Debates erupted. People asked the same question. What if his mom hadn't come? The police department launched an internal review. Body camera footage contradicted reports. The burglary call? Unsubstantiated. The detention? Unjustified. 2 officers were suspended. Policy changes announced. But trust was already broken. Angela didn't stop. She spoke publicly. She organized town halls. She demanded accountability, not just for Jamal, but for every child without a camera. Weeks later, Jamal told his story about fear, about humiliation, about relief when his mom arrived. She didn't panic, he said. She protected me. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a warning and a lesson. Silence protects systems. Evidence exposes them. Police arrested a black teen, but his mother showed up prepared. And because she did, the truth survived. It began the way so many days do, not with shouting, not with violence, not with sirens or flashing lights. It began with something ordinary. A shopping mall on a Saturday afternoon. Bright storefronts glowed behind glass. Escalators hummed as people moved up and down. The smell of coffee drifted from a food court. Parents held shopping bags. Teenagers laughed too loudly. Security cameras blinked silently from their corners, watching everything and saying nothing. A place built for comfort. A place built for control. A place where nothing unusual was supposed to happen. But control has a way of revealing its cracks when assumption replaces evidence. At 2:34 p.m., a woman walked to the front doors of Southgate Mall. She had no idea that within the next hour, she would be accused of a crime she did not commit, escorted out in front of strangers, and humiliated in a way she would never forget. And if not for one unexpected moment, one man deciding to look closer, her story would have ended right there. This is a story of how security threw a black woman out of a mall, and how everything changed when the owner walked in. Southgate Mall had stood for more than 20 years. It wasn't the biggest mall in the state, but it was one of the busiest. Built during the golden era of suburban expansion, it was designed to feel safe, familiar, and predictable. Families came here every weekend. Elderly residents walked its halls in the morning for exercise. Teenagers treated it like a second home. And like most modern malls, it was heavily monitored. Cameras in every hallway. Security patrols circulating at all hours. Clear policies meant to prevent theft and disorder. From the outside, Southgate Mall appeared perfectly controlled. But control often depends on who is trusted and who is watched more closely. On busy days, security relied heavily on instinct, quick decisions, snap judgments, assumptions made in seconds. And that Saturday afternoon, one of those assumptions would change everything. Her name was Monique Harris. She was 32 years old, a public school teacher, a single mother. People who knew her described her as calm, thoughtful, and steady. She avoided confrontation. She believed in fairness. She believed that if you did nothing wrong, things would work out the way they should. That morning, her day started early. She woke her 8-year-old daughter for school, packed lunch, checked homework, answered emails from parents and co-workers before the sun fully rose. Her daughter complained, again, that her winter jacket felt too tight. The sleeves barely reached her wrists. Winter was approaching fast. So Monique promised she'd buy a new one that afternoon. She dressed comfortably. Nothing flashy. Nothing suspicious. Just a black winter coat, jeans, boots, and her purse. She grabbed her phone and headed to Southgate Mall. To her, it was just another errand. To someone else, it would become something entirely different. Just after 2:40 p.m., Monique entered Harper's boutique. The store was bright and orderly. Jackets hung neatly on racks. Soft music played overhead. Everything felt calm. Monique moved slowly, browsing the children's section. She checked price tags, compared sizes, ran her hand over fabric, imagining how warm it would keep her daughter. At one rack, she paused. A blue padded jacket caught her eye. It looked warm, durable, perfect. She lifted it from a hanger and draped it over her arm. Then her phone buzzed. A text message. "Mom, did you find one yet?" Monique smiled. She typed back a quick response. And somewhere across the store, a sales associate noticed her. The associate watched Monique closely. At first, she told herself she was just being attentive, doing her job. But attention slowly turned into something else. The jacket stayed over Monique's arm longer than expected. Her eyes drifted to her phone. She didn't head straight to the register. And instead of asking a simple question, instead of offering help, the associate made a decision. She contacted mall security. When the call came in, security responded immediately. 2 guards were dispatched. They didn't review the store's cameras. They didn't ask for clarification. They didn't confirm whether any item was missing. They trusted the accusation, because in places like this, suspicion often moves faster than evidence. The guards entered Harper's boutique and walked directly toward Monique. Other customers noticed a shift in energy. Conversations quieted. People stepped aside. The atmosphere changed. "Ma'am, we need to check your bag." The words landed hard. Monique looked up, confused. She blinked, certain she must have misheard. "Why?" she asked calmly. The response came immediately. "We believe you took merchandise." No alarm had gone off. No item was missing. No footage had been reviewed. Just belief. Monique felt her chest tighten. She opened her purse without hesitation. Inside were only her wallet, her phone, and her keys. Nothing else. She explained that she hadn't left the store, that she hadn't hidden anything, that she was still deciding which jacket to buy. But the guards weren't listening. Their minds were already made up. Security took Monique by the arms. Not violently, but firmly enough to make a point, enough to send a message. Shoppers stopped walking. Phones appeared in hands. Whispers followed her. Monique didn't resist. She didn't raise her voice. She repeated one sentence over and over. "I didn't steal anything." But authority moves faster than truth. She was escorted to the mall corridors, past familiar stores, past strangers whose eyes followed her with curiosity and judgment. People didn't know what had happened. They saw security escorting a woman out and assumed guilt. By the time they reached the main entrance, Monique's heart was pounding. Not because she was guilty, but because she understood how this looked. The glass doors slid open. She was pushed outside. And just like that, she was alone. The doors closed behind her. The warmth of the mall vanished instantly. Monique sat down on a bench just outside the entrance. The winter air felt sharper now. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from shock. She replayed the moment in her head again and again. What did I do wrong? Why didn't they listen? Why didn't anyone stop them? Inside, shoppers continued their day as if nothing had happened. But for Monique, nothing would feel normal again. What Monique didn't know was that someone had been recording. A bystander, disturbed by what he was seeing, had pulled out his phone. His video showed everything. A calm woman. No resistance. No stolen items. No explanation. Within hours, the video was uploaded online. At first, it received a few hundred views, then thousands, then millions. Comments flooded in. People recognized a pattern. They had seen stories like this before. Different location, different name, same outcome. The video reached someone unexpected. David Whitman, the owner of Southgate Mall. Whitman had built the mall from the ground up. He prided himself on running a clean, fair operation. When he watched the footage, something didn't sit right. This didn't look like theft. This looked like a failure. So, he didn't call security. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't send an email. He got in his car, and he drove to the mall himself. Inside the security office, Whitman stood in front of the monitors. He watched Monique enter the store, browse, smile at her phone. He rewound the footage. Again and again, there was no theft, no concealment, no justification for what had happened. The room fell silent. Whitman turned to the guards. His voice was calm, but unmistakably firm. "Bring her back." Outside, Monique was still sitting on the bench, still confused, still shaken. When Whitman approached her, she didn't recognize him at first. He introduced himself. Then he apologized, not with corporate language, not with excuses, but with accountability. He told her she had done nothing wrong, that the situation had been mishandled, that he was sorry. For the first time that day, someone believed her. An internal investigation followed. The conclusion was clear. Monique had not stolen anything. Security guards were removed from duty. Store policies were rewritten. Mandatory bias and de-escalation training was introduced. But the larger question lingered. What if the owner hadn't walked in? What if the video didn't exist? Would Monique have ever been believed? This wasn't just a mall incident. It was a reminder that assumptions can become accusations. That authority doesn't always equal truth. That dignity can be stripped away in moments. Security can remove someone from a place, but only accountability can restore dignity. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks in quietly and finally tells the truth.